What's up, everybody? My name is Ale. Welcome to my world of stocks. I know that sounds a little weird. I changed the name from Ale's World of Finance to Ale's World of Stocks. And the reason why is because, let's just be honest, we mostly talk about stocks on this channel. 99% of what we talk about is stocks. But don't freak out, nothing is changing on the channel. I do still have plans to make other financial or money related videos on things like compound interest, passive income, how to make money online, how to save money, different things like that. But the reality is that we mostly talk about stocks, and that's what we're going to mostly be talking about on this channel. So I thought this name is a little more appropriate and fits it better. But with that being said, welcome to Sunday Stock Battle, where we pit two stocks against each other and we award points for every category that we go through. Now, today's episode, this is episode 2, and so if you want to see the past episode or any other episodes in general, I created a playlist for you guys. You can find it right up here in the description below, or it'll also be clickable on a card at the end of this video. Now, today's video has been highly requested. It is AMD versus Nvidia. I've also received a lot of requests for AMD versus Intel, but given the fact that both AMD and Nvidia are up by like insane amounts, I decided it'd be a little more appropriate to just go with the AMD versus Nvidia. And having said that, I know that they are both up by such a large amount, especially as of recent. So if you're a value investor and you just do not care about these stocks, then that's completely fine. You can just watch the video for entertainment purposes. Nobody is forced to invest in anything. But we're going to be looking at long-term potential. Which one of these two stocks would be a better investment in the long term? Now, just a quick disclaimer. If you've been watching my channel, then you know that AMD has long been my second largest stock. And because it's been up by so much recently, I more than doubled my money and I decided to cash in a lot of that profit. I've also been buying other stocks. And so because of that reason, AMD has fallen from my second largest stock to, I think right now it's like my fifth largest stock. So when we do the next video of 3 stocks that I'm investing in, we do that every month where I talk about my 3 largest stocks, you'll see that AMD is no longer on the top 3. AMD has fallen to the 5th spot, I think, as of right now. So there will be a new stock on that list. But I don't want you guys to worry. I will still for sure be making AMD videos all the time because I am planning on holding the rest of that stock that I have in AMD. I'm planning on holding it long term because the way I see it is that, look, I cashed in some profits. So if the stock drops now, if it gets corrected, if we have a market correction and a stock like AMD gets hammered or anything like that, and the stock goes down, I've already cashed in some profits and I can buy more AMD stock at a cheaper price. But because I'm also holding a lot of my AMD stock, if it continues to go up with the trend, you know, we're obviously seeing a very large short squeeze in my opinion because the stock has just been absolutely on fire. And if it continues to trend upward, I will still benefit from that because I am holding some AMD stock still. I think like right now it's like my 5th largest stock. And so the way I see it, I can benefit either way. And I'm not planning on selling that AMD stock anytime soon. I'm planning on holding that for several years to come. But as far as Nvidia goes, I do not own any Nvidia stock. I used to own Nvidia stock, but after going up by about 30%, I cashed in those profits and I sold Nvidia stock, and I sold way too early. I felt like an idiot, and Nvidia has been climbing ever since. So I definitely missed out on a lot of profits. But as of right now, I do not have any Nvidia stock, but I do have some AMD stock that I am holding long term. But anyway, don't forget to leave a comment down below and vote for Ale's World Consensus. Let me know which one of these two stocks, if you had to pick one, which one of these two stocks would you invest in long term, AMD or Nvidia? Now, in the previous episode, we looked at Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. 13 amateur analysts voted, and 69% of those votes went to PepsiCo stock, and only 31% went to Coca-Cola stock. So maybe Pepsi is a stock worth looking into. But back to AMD versus Nvidia, we're going to start by looking at their business. And so this is going to get a little interesting. But now, when looking at their business, when looking at AMD is mostly a semiconductor company who mostly develop CPU, GPU, and APU chips. Now, in the CPU market, their biggest and most promising product line is their set of Ryzen chips. So when looking at Ryzen, AMD has Ryzen 3, 5, 7, and Threadripper, and all of those really compete against Intel because Nvidia is not really in the CPU market. So Intel has the i3, i5, i7, and i9. Those directly compete with AMD's chips. And what's really cool in particular is that when looking at Threadripper, the second generation of Threadripper was just released this month, and it is an absolute beast. On the high end, it offers 32 cores and 16 threads, which is actually double than their highest Ryzen Threadripper from their first gen, which offered a max of 16 cores. So now it's double that. And so with price cuts to the first gen Threadripper, you're talking about an extremely powerful, maybe even overkill processor in their second gen that is really targeted at machine learning, blockbuster level video rendering, and complex data science. But then when you look at the first gen, on the lower end of that, you have the Ryzen Threadripper with 8 cores costing only $300. So that's definitely a lot of power at a very affordable price that can be much more accessible to the broader consumer market. And speaking of the broader consumer market, we know that when looking at AMD's Ryzen desktop CPUs, they are currently scheduled to get their 7 nanometer Ryzen chips out by 2019, or maybe a little bit later than that. But I think if they can get them out by 2019, that would be a big deal, because Intel is currently struggling just to get their 10 nanometer chips out by holiday 2019. So AMD can potentially beat them to the punch with a smaller node, a 7 nanometer manufacturing process, versus Intel's 10 nanometer process, and AMD could potentially even get them out earlier than Intel. And I know that it's not always fair to compare manufacturing processes of different companies. You know, a lot of people say that Intel's 10 nanometer will probably have similar power to AMD's 7 nanometer. But when looking at their server CPUs, AMD is looking to get their 7 nanometer EPYC chips out by 2019, so next year, while Intel doesn't even plan to release theirs until 2020. So that's a pretty big deal. And the reason why it's a big deal is because AMD currently has only around 1% of the server CPU market share, whereas Intel has like 98%. And Intel made around $19 billion in server revenue last year, so it's definitely a very important market. Now, AMD has already stated that they are looking to get high single-digit market share soon when looking at the server market. So even if they get around 10% of that, that would equal to around $2 billion, which is massive considering that the total revenue for AMD in 2017 was only around $5 billion. But something that really matters here is looking at GPUs, because that's really the space where AMD receives massive competition from Nvidia and vice versa. Now, AMD is currently set to bring out their 7 nanometer Vega GPUs ahead of schedule before the end of this year, and then their next gen Navi may come as early as 2019, but it could also be pushed out to 2020 if need be. Now, while AMD's GPUs are expected to be used by the high-selling PlayStation and Xbox home gaming consoles, and especially in their next generation, Nvidia is really doing so much more in terms of power and technology. Now, currently, Nvidia is using their 20 nanometer Tegra chip in the Nintendo Switch, which, by the way, has been absolutely on fire and has been seeing incredible results, and should probably see even higher sales because of the upcoming Pokemon and Smash Brothers games. So the fact that Nvidia is powering the Nintendo Switch is definitely a big deal, but you could also argue that PlayStation is a much bigger deal and AMD powers the PlayStation. So anyway, more importantly, they recently showed off their newest GPUs that may offer completely unrivaled power in their 2080 and 2080 Ti GPUs, both of which offering ray tracing capabilities that AMD does not currently offer. And if you've never heard about ray tracing, I've got just a quick little excerpt from Nvidia's CEO talking about their newest GPUs that offer ray tracing. And by the way, ray tracing just looks absolutely stunning. You should look at a video online. But he basically said, it is the first ray tracing GPU in the world. It is the first GPU that will be able to ray trace light in an environment and create photorealistic shadow and reflections, and be able to model things like area lights and global illumination and indirect lighting. But the images are going to be so beautiful. When you look at it, it just looks like a movie. And that's really what it looks like. You know, it's taking like video games and turning them into something that looks like actual movies. So it's just very impressive technology. Now, Nvidia really dominates the discrete GPU market. I say discrete because that's where you actually sell the individual GPUs on their own. When looking at the integrated GPU market, that's really dominated by Intel, but it also sees a lot of heavy competition from AMD and Nvidia, but so it's kind of a lot more evenly spread out. But Nvidia really dominates the discrete GPU market, although AMD is making a lot of progress there. Last time I checked, they were able to get close to 35% of that market when looking at AMD, and that is up from around 28% the previous year. and then Nvidia really makes up the rest of that. Since Intel doesn't really compete in that space, they don't have their own discrete GPUs, at least not yet. They do have plans to start making their own GPUs in the near future. Now, despite Nvidia really dominating the discrete GPU market, AMD really competes with Nvidia more on the lower end GPU side, offering more affordable pricing for sometimes similar performance. But when you look at, power, and especially on the higher end GPUs, I think most people really agree that Nvidia just cannot be rivaled by AMD. Nvidia just offers so much more power and so much more technology with their chips and with their software. But also when looking at home consoles, that's really on the side of AMD. When looking at PlayStation and Xbox, but Nintendo Switch is powered by Nvidia. And then when looking at crypto mining, that's been important as of recent as well. But crypto miners have usually preferred AMD GPUs. But I also wouldn't focus too much on crypto mining because we've seen negative growth in that area because crypto prices have been dramatically declining. And so, both AMD and Nvidia really come out and say in pretty much like all their earnings calls that I've seen, they always say, don't focus on crypto mining. Our focus is really gaming. They really prefer gaming as opposed to crypto mining. But because Nvidia has so much stronger technology, their chips and their software are usually the preferred ones to use in markets that are projected to have enormous growth in the future. So when looking at markets like artificial intelligence, applications and devices for IoT, like the Internet of Things, which, by the way, Nvidia recently announced that they partnered with UK-based ARM to bring artificial intelligence to, quote, billions of connected devices. So that could be a potentially very important partnership there. They also are usually preferred in the data center GPU side of things, which makes up a massive amount of revenue for Nvidia when talking about data center GPUs instead of CPUs. And then they are also used for professional visualization and autonomous driving markets as well, not to mention drones also. In fact, Nvidia has had a long-time partnership with Tesla. I'm sure you've all heard of Tesla, so Nvidia was making the chips for Tesla, but as of recent, Elon Musk did announce that they are going to be making their own chips, and he says that their chips are actually 10 times faster than anything they can buy from Nvidia, so that is a little bit of a concern there as well. But still, it can't be ignored that these markets are really projected to take off in the future, and Nvidia is really ahead of the curve when looking at their technology and their software and their different platforms that they offer in terms of Nvidia versus AMD. So that is definitely a major advantage of Nvidia. But the reason why I'm going to give this round a tie is because I've never really considered AMD as just a competitor to Nvidia. I've always thought of them, in the discrete GPU market. I've also considered them a competitor to Intel in the integrated GPU market and APU market, the CPU market, the server CPU market. And all of those markets, AMD had a ton of market share that they could actually steal, and they still have a lot of market share that they can steal. So I've always just kind of felt like AMD had possibly more growth potential in some of those markets. But then again, you look at Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous driving, all that kind of stuff. I feel like Nvidia just has better technology. So I'm going to give this round a tie. I'm leaning maybe slightly more towards Nvidia, and I think a lot of analysts would give the point to Nvidia and a lot of investors as well. But I think I'm going to give it a tie because I think both companies are doing really good things with their business. They both have great management, and I think that they both have tremendous potential in the future. And even though AMD is not currently very competitive in some of these, artificial intelligence and machine learning areas, maybe Nvidia is beating them in those areas. That also means that AMD could potentially tap into those markets in the future, and I think they definitely will, especially under the leadership of Lisa Su and their management. So I think AMD can still do a lot of things in autonomous driving. There's no reason why they can't compete in those markets in the future. So I'm leaning a little more towards Nvidia, but I'm going to give this round a tie. So both companies will get 1 point here. All right, but we're really here to talk about the two stocks. So how do their valuations compare? Well, to put it short, both stocks are up by an insane amount. I don't think that means that they can't continue to go up, but what it does mean is that they are considered growth stocks that sell for a premium price. AMD is currently trading at its highest price in over a decade at around $24 a share. Nvidia, same thing, except I think it's at its highest price in history at over $270 per share. And in the last 3 years, well, both stocks are up well over 1,000%. So that is insane performance. Now, when looking at some of their metrics, I know that different websites report numbers in different ways, so it can be a little confusing sometimes. I decided to get these metrics from simply wallstreet.com because I'm not sponsored by them, by the way. This might sound like this is a commercial for them, but the reason I chose them is because they update their estimates pretty frequently from what I've seen. So I feel like I'm getting more recent information. Plus, they also offer pretty nice looking charts as well. So it makes it just kind of visually appealing. But anyway, when looking at some of their numbers here, AMD's PE ratio is at 74, which is almost double that of Nvidia at 38. But perhaps a reason why AMD's PE ratio is so high is because they are expected to have a larger growth rate in the next few years. When comparing their PEG ratios, which factor in future growth, AMD is actually much lower at around 1.5, whereas Nvidia is at 2.2. So ideally, we would like to have those ratios closer to 1, but the fact that AMD is at 1.5, Nvidia at 2.2, I think AMD has a much better ratio there. And that's really evident by seeing that Nvidia has a much lower earnings growth rate at only 17%, while AMD eclipses that number by more than double at 48%. And so even though Nvidia is expected to have higher revenue growth by around 6%, I think that having much higher earnings growth for AMD should barely earn it the win in this category. So we are going to give the point to AMD, even though I do think that estimates for Nvidia are lower than they should be, in my opinion. All right, now another thing that I like to look at is EPS Surprise, because it tells you whether a company has been outperforming and beating analysts' expectations and estimates. So when looking at the last 4 quarters, this is from Nasdaq.com, Nvidia has only beat AMD in one of those quarters. You can see that on this chart right up here. Nvidia has only beat AMD in one of those quarters. AMD has won 3 of the last 4 quarters, so we'll give another point to AMD here as well. All right, next up is the income statement, and this one is a no-brainer. Nvidia is just going to dominate this one. When looking at their income statements for the past 4 years, Nvidia has consistently brought in more revenue, less cost of revenue, more gross profit, obviously, and more net income than AMD, and they've been profitable all 4 years, whereas AMD only recently became profitable last year and by a small amount. So Nvidia really gets the point here for bringing in more money and being more profitable by larger amounts on a consistent basis. And then when looking at their balance sheets, it's pretty much the same story here. So even though they have similar current liabilities, and Nvidia does have about $1 billion more in total liabilities, when it comes to assets, Nvidia just blows AMD out of the water. Nvidia has about $3 billion more cash, $7 billion more in current assets, and around $8 billion more in total assets. Now, don't get me wrong, both companies have at least decent enough looking balance sheets to the point where they can pay off their short-term liabilities, but where AMD is like a 2-to-1 current ratio, Nvidia eclipses that with like an 8-to-1 ratio. So the point here has to easily go to Nvidia. And then one more thing to look at here is dividends. Nvidia does actually pay out a dividend. AMD does not currently pay out any dividends. And while Nvidia's dividend yield is extremely low at about 0.2%, this is really a dividend that has been growing for many years, and the payout ratio is very low at less than 10%. So that means that they have plenty of room to grow out those dividends in the future if they choose to do so. Their track record would say that they probably will continue to pay out those dividends and increase them as well. So the point here will also go to Nvidia. All right, so in conclusion, Nvidia takes the win, 4 points versus AMD at 3 points. So it just kind of barely takes the win here. But remember, all of this is really arbitrary. A lot of this is based on my opinion, and especially when looking at the business and things like that. But just remember that just because one company might appear to be better when looking at certain aspects, it doesn't mean that both companies can't continue to thrive. We've obviously been seeing that lately, right? Both AMD and Nvidia are doing insanely well in terms of not only their business, but also their stock and their stock performance. So I really think that both companies are really good companies for the long term, really good stocks for the long term. Right now, I do think that they are currently up a lot. I would love to see a major dip. And, a lot of people are expecting a stock market crash. I'm a little more realistic. I'm expecting a stock market correction sometime probably if not at the end of this year, if not some point in this year, probably early next year. I am expecting some kind of a correction. And usually when we see a correction, high growth stocks like AMD and Nvidia usually get corrected by a pretty large amount. So if that were to ever happen, that would definitely be a great opportunity for me to pick up some more stock, especially with AMD. But I do really like both of them. But looking at today's metrics and everything that we looked at, just one small piece of the giant puzzle. But based on today's video, it looks like Nvidia just barely takes the win over AMD. But who cares what I think? Who cares that everything that we looked at today? I'm really interested to know what you guys think. Make sure you leave a comment down below. Which one of these two stocks do you like more for the long term? Again, I know that they're up an insane amount. I'll probably receive some hate comments in this, saying that they're up by such a ridiculous amount. But also, don't forget, right now they have momentum on their side. We're probably seeing a short squeeze as well because, AMD has just been seeing amazing performance lately. And, a lot of times I don't really like to bet against the trend. That's why I don't usually short stocks. And even when stocks go up a large amount, I usually stay away from shorting just because I'm not very good at predicting that. I'm not very good at predicting, and going against the market, going against the trend of what everybody's doing. A lot of people are just buying AMD and Nvidia right now for future potential. So I wouldn't really want to bet against them. I have read a few reports. I know I'm getting a little off track here, but I read a few reports when I was doing some of this research of some different people saying, oh, short AMD right now, short it right now, short it right now. And this was when AMD just kind of started climbing as of recent. And then AMD just took off, and then I went back to those, I went through the comment sections to see what those analysts said, because these analysts were telling you to short the stocks, and then the stock just took off. And in the comment section, they were like, "Oh, but we covered those shorts right away, so we didn't lose any money." Like, oh, they always have an excuse. Whenever they give horrible advice, they always have an excuse. As always, I'm not giving you guys advice. Don't do what I do. Don't copy my style. Don't copy what I invest in. I just like to give you guys information and let you know what I'm doing, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do your own research and make your own decisions. But anyway, I just got completely off topic. Thank you so much for watching. I really had a lot of fun. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. Take care. Bye-bye.